that is a clean, green recovery. So, first of all, I don't think it's necessarily a green idea that we need to build back green. I think the public have really intuited this fact. People have obviously spent more time at home, spent more time walking outdoors in their local communities, and there's been a huge appreciation from people about the importance of their local green space and the sense that nature really matters, especially for people living in cities who have had more time to spend in their parks and in their open spaces. So I think that's really important. I think the general public have really seen that better is possible, that we can have a green recovery. Also the fact that there's been reduced traffic, especially in the first lockdown. I think a lot of people appreciated the sense of quiet, appreciated the cleaner air, and I'm getting some messages that my volume's a little quiet. I will speak up as much as I can, people. So hopefully most people can hear me well. So I think the public have actually really seen that we need to build back a green recovery from the crisis. Okay, I'll finish this answer, then I might change computer because I'm getting a few people saying they can't hear me. But, you know, as a Green Party councillor, I've been pushing for what we do in Liverpool to be green. For example, I started an online petition calling for the pop-up cycle lanes. This was something that was taken up and it was adopted as a policy of the council. But unfortunately, due to a lack of commitment, a lack of resources being given to this policy, not enough has actually been done. And now, nearly a year into the crisis, we still don't have adequate pop-up cycle lanes for the city. So, you know, if I was a Green mayor during this crisis, I would have really pushed for that, and you would have seen that kind of response. I think as we recover from this, and if I was the Green mayor, I would strongly prioritise good quality green jobs as we recover. If you look at how things have been done in Liverpool in the past, there's been about £100 million worth of roadworks currently in place in Liverpool. Now that's because there's been a priority to build highways infrastructure. I would just change that priority a little bit, and you know, I'd invest that money in green jobs, in clean green jobs that can really fund a green recovery. So that would be my main priority, in the main way that I'd make sure we built back green. Sure, yeah. Well, one example is I think we urgently need a really big programme of retrofitting housing within the city to bring them up to much better energy efficiency standards. That's the area that I work in professionally. I'm a self-employed energy efficiency assessor. So I go around, most weeks looking at people's houses, and I can see the potential to just save huge amounts of energy by properly insulating people's homes, by updating their heating systems. And it's something that, it needs to be done. We need to reduce fuel poverty in the city. It's a really big issue for a lot of people within the city. But also it would generate a huge amount of jobs, and training, for example, and further education is an issue which the local authorities and the city region have a good level of control over. So we can prioritise this kind of training. We can set up apprenticeships and educational qualifications to get people doing this work, and it would have so many co-benefits because, as I said, tackling fuel poverty, reducing carbon emissions, and just making people's homes fit for the 21st century. It's a huge priority, and that is one example of green jobs. And there are other jobs which aren't green per se, but which fit with a target of achieving zero carbon. You can look, for example, at the arts, creative industries, which they have a low impact on the environment. They're really good, attractive industries to work in, and we can attract those by making our city the kind of places people want to come and do that work.
Great, thank you. Our next question may be related, but What would you and the Green Party do to address the poverty and lack of opportunities for people in Liverpool, particularly in the northern part of the city?
Sorry, could you just repeat that for me? Very sorry, Natasha.
So what would you and the Green Party do to address poverty and lack of opportunities for people in Liverpool, particularly in the northern part of the city?
Well, that would be a massive priority. Obviously, we'd really, any mayor would be looking to reduce inequality. And there are so many things which are dear to my heart, which do have an inequality aspect. So I mentioned, obviously, fuel poverty. The poorer people probably live in the worst quality housing, which are the most expensive to heat. So addressing that does address a natural inequality. The issue of air quality as well, I think that is a huge inequality. The people who are most affected by this problem in our city, and it is a huge problem, hundreds of people dying every year as a result of air quality. These are likely to be people living in the poorest communities, the people least likely to actually own a car and least likely to be contributing to poor air quality. So working hard to address these things does naturally reduce inequality. But I also want to make Liverpool a high quality city to live in, a place that people would choose to come and set up their businesses. And that means having a vision of the kind of city you want to be. And I think to attract high quality jobs to the city and people to set their businesses up here, I think actually making Liverpool a safer, cleaner, greener city is a way of making it a really attractive option. And something I'll be looking at as well as a way of making sure we have as many good opportunities in the city as possible would be looking at things like retaining graduates. Liverpool is a fantastic city to come and study. And that's how I ended up here myself 20 years ago. I did a degree here in Liverpool and I never left. But actually, when you look at the figures, Liverpool it's not in the top 10 cities for retaining its own graduates. And I think that's something we really need to urgently look at. What is it that Liverpool isn't offering people which is making them want to stay? So if we can do that, we'll set up, we'll create a much more, an environment where there's a lot more opportunities for people.
Thank you. So our next question, government funding for Liverpool has been shrinking, and yet there are many problems in the city that really need to be tackled, as mentioned there. So how would you do more with less? Where is it that you can make savings or find the money that you would need to spend?
Yeah, fantastic question. It's really true. Liverpool has been incredibly hard hit by the government cuts. We've had over £400 million reduced from our annual budget in Liverpool since 2010. That's an enormous cut. That's around about 65% of our government funding has been removed. So that has had a devastating impact on the council. It means that services have been stripped right down to the bone. It's been a fairly difficult process over this last decade. So there's a lot of, that has caused difficulties, but I actually have to pay credit to the council officers still working at the council who are managing to continue to deliver a lot of services really, really well. Not as well as we'd like, but considering what they have had to put up with, there are a lot of impressive things happening in the office, in the council. So I would continue, obviously, to work with everyone within the council to make sure that whatever our situation is, we deliver our services the best we possibly can in as fair a way as possible. But something that a lot of the focus has been since this process has started has been on things like using capital projects as a way of creating jobs and encouraging growth. And I think that is because there's a division between revenue and capital. So it's a lot of the revenue, the day-to-day running costs that has been reduced for the council. But capital, we can still access money to invest in projects that we think will deliver a benefit to the city. And as I do look to build back better, as I do look to create that green recovery, I will be looking at projects which support those aims, which will create jobs, which will create opportunities in the city. And I think that's one of the ways that we can try and offset some of the difficulties that have been caused by the cuts. I have consistently, as an opposition councillor, every single year that I've been a councillor, the Green Party have put forward an alternative budget where we show how we would prevent some cuts. For example, when the libraries were threatened a few years ago, we created a budget cut to show how we would have kept the libraries open. Last year, in our budget, in our budget amendment, in our alternative budget, we showed how we create a £100 million climate emergency fund to spend on projects. So, even without having had the office of mayor, without having the sort of support that a mayor would have to deliver their objectives, I've been able as an opposition councillor to show that I could create a £100 million climate fund. So, as I say, I can't reiterate enough, there are going to be difficult times ahead, and the cuts have been horrendous in Liverpool. It's been one of the worst affected in the whole country, despite being one of the most deprived cities. But there are ways that you can work creatively to try to offset some of these worst impacts.
I think related to that, really, how would you support local construction and infrastructure businesses to win over capital infrastructure projects that have routinely been awarded to big national companies? And is it possible to do that whilst being sustainable?
I would say yes. I think they'd be really good objectives. I think as a mayor, that's the sort of thing I'd be looking to do. Generally talking about doing things locally, politically, I believe in decentralisation. I believe we should try to have a people-powered democracy with really good levels of local engagement. And the same does apply to kind of, as you say, getting works done within the city. So one way I'd look to do that is I'd look to really strengthen how we kind of push for social value within our contracts. For example, you can, as a council, say that you want a certain percentage of people employed in any project to be local. So that's something I'd definitely look to do. I think you could definitely, use your procurement to support local businesses with that objective of providing more jobs in the local area. And also, I think this would be a kind of inadvertent impact of strengthening our climate policies. So as we become lower carbon, as we look to become a zero carbon city, actually, appointing local firms is going to be greener because it results in less transportation and people, being more engaged with their communities. So I think there are a lot of ways the council can support that localism agenda and employ more local people, definitely.
Great. Do you think the current, this is actually a question that's come up, a very similar question that's come up in the chat, so I'll go with the chat box question. Do you think Liverpool's planning department at the moment lacks transparency around these decisions? The questioner adds that they're ongoingly shocked by what happens in Lock Lane without reference to the residents.
Well, yeah, that's the planning department of the city council like Liverpool is a huge and sprawling affair. People may be aware that there's a certain amount of scrutiny on Liverpool's planning department at this very time. I wouldn't want to say too much about the specifics of that because there is this ongoing investigation. But it's certainly an area that's incredibly important for making a city safe. I think the questioner mentioned Lark Lane specifically. Obviously, that's within my ward, so I'm confronted by these planning applications and these issues arising the whole time. Sometimes I think that type of problem is because of a council not actually enforcing its own rules properly. There are actually quite good protections for Lark Lane because it's a conservation area, and it therefore should have a fair level of protection. But the council's struggling to actually enforce its own rules, and that is something I would certainly look at. And I'd like to see the council take a more robust line against property owners or developers who do things which are against planning rules. And if there's an enforcement available, I think that should be definitely applied. But going more broadly about what planning can do to help a city, I mean, I've pushed over the years quite a lot for more ambitious planning regulations. For example, higher energy efficiency standards for housing. I've pushed for that within the council, and you often get kind of replies along the lines of they don't want to put developers off. They don't want to, make it less likely that things happen in Liverpool. But I think that just shows a lack of ambition. I'm ambitious that Liverpool should have the absolute best and deserves the absolute best. So I wouldn't stand for that. I would make sure that our local plan and that our policies really do promote the highest quality developments. I mentioned energy efficiency, but there are a lot of things planning can do to promote the drive towards zero carbon. For example, we're expected at the moment a housing development should provide 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling. That's the 20th century speaking there. We need to update that and think about what low car communities are going to look like and how people are going to be travelling in a sustainable way in the near future. So there are huge amounts of changes. I've pushed for these over the course of the council developing its local plan. Some people may know that the council is expected to produce a local plan that guides planning for 15 years. The Green Party have really engaged with that process, and we were the only party who actually had councillors turning up to pretty much every session of the examination of that local plan to make comments and ask for changes. So planning is hugely important. We've been really involved in it over time, and I think it needs to be strengthened and improved.
Thank you. It's really interesting that the rules are in place already. They're just not necessarily being stuck to. Move on a little bit. What proposals or plans do you have to clean our air by 2030?
I just looked up because my daughter's just walked into the room. Hi, Charlie. Cleaning, that made her go away, so that achieved its objective. Yeah, so cleaning air, it's obviously it's a national issue. It's in the national news the whole time. We heard a terrible report from the UN that I think 8.7 million lives globally were lost as a result of poor air quality. So it's a complete and utter emergency. Something needs to be done to clean our air. We need a clean green plan for better transport and better air, so that we can stop having this affecting everybody's health. And it's something I have campaigned on for a long time. I think I organised my first demo about air quality in 2014. So I've got pedigree in really caring about this issue, and it would be a huge priority for me as mayor. And obviously, transport is one of the main contributors of poor air quality. It's the number one reason why a city like Liverpool does have poor air quality. So for that reason, it's important for the reason of air quality, but also meeting our carbon commitments to get to zero carbon by 2030. And unfortunately, transport emissions are one of the most stubbornly high areas of emission in the national grid. The amount of renewables producing electricity is rising, meaning that the carbon impact of electricity is coming down. Same for housing. Newer houses are much more efficient than older houses, but transport's the one area we're really, really struggling to sort of make a dent in those problems. So obviously it's a really big priority for me as a Green. I believe that we need to have a much more mixed transport network. So obviously continuing to support public transport, but I would really quickly work towards having a proper network of integrated cycle lanes, so people have really good quality, safe cycling infrastructure to use. we've got a big, in our manifesto, we've got a big section called City of Activity, because we really believe that walking, cycling, using public transport are a much more healthy and positive way to get around a city like Liverpool. So that, that is a big priority. And I think there are new developments emerging that are going to really contribute positively to this. The current sort of electric scooter trial that's going on in Liverpool, I think it's a really interesting model. Excuse me, the model where the things are very easily accessible. You don't have to plan ahead so much, and there's a really good mix of different transport options. And I think for the city in the near future, we should be looking at a much more flexible, mixed transport network that isn't so based on the use of private motor cars, and that would have the desired impact on air quality as well.
Great. Can you see much of a role for things like, for example, tree planting within the city of Liverpool?
100%, yeah. I mean, I totally support tree planting. One of the big pieces of work we've been doing recently is looking at how every area of open space, which might now be just poor quality grassland or regularly mowed grass, whether that could be better managed to encourage more biodiversity, more sort of wildflower planting, that kind of thing. So we've done a lot of work on that recently, and that would have a huge impact on air quality. That would really encourage, more plant life does clean the air, and I think that would go hand in hand with a better transport system.
Thanks, Tom. I have a few questions on the more politics side of things. And this is a little bit of a longer question, but I do think it's really interesting. Quoting from the questionnaire, how does one engage and get through to people? I use a litter picker on Otterspool Prom, and I'm confronted by litter daily, mostly plastic. Although we may think slowly the message is getting through, I would suggest it is not, or if it is, then it's too slowly. And it's not just about litter, but an attitude to the planet. How can we engage a troubled electorate that is swept up in the pandemic and getting distracted from a far bigger threat?
That's a really well put question. It's a huge question. I think there's loads of different ways of answering that. I agree. I think to some extent, expecting every single person to kind of have a moment of waking up to the problem and deciding, of their own steam, that it's time to start being really environmentally conscious and really responsible. Maybe that's not the right approach. And I think in a way that has been the approach. So, for example, with packaging, people are told that it's their responsibility to sort their recycling and their responsibility to recycle. And if they don't do that, they're not being environmentally responsible. And so that's the litter problem. That's the waste issue. Actually, it's the companies producing these products that are putting these things into our communities in the first place. And we've been far too gentle with the companies, far too gentle with the manufacturers who are basically flooding our communities with rubbish. And actually, I think we need to focus upstream a little bit and really have policies which reduce the production of waste in the first place. I think that would be easier. I think it would be more beneficial, and actually it's targeting the right people rather than individuals who've got so much to contend with on a day-to-day basis anyway. So I'd look to change the system. I believe we can move towards a no single-use economy where everything is either reused or repurposed in some way. I believe we can do that, and that would be the way to go for me. And I think in terms of the message getting through and people maybe not caring about the planet enough, maybe they see like the environmental movement and the Green Party and green policies as kind of being told they can't have things that they want. And it's really important to start looking at, why would a green economy be better? Why would it be a better thing to live, in a greener society? And there's loads of reasons for that. So if we're not endlessly pursuing economic growth, if we're not, desperate to get people consuming as much as possible for the good of the economy, we can start thinking about introducing a 4-day working week. And not because the economy is faltering, but because that makes people's lives better, because having a 3-day weekend is a better thing than a 2-day weekend. The Green Party have long had the policy of a basic income, a non-means tested benefit which everybody gets, which should be enough to cover their essential needs in life: housing, food, utilities. So if everybody knows that in a green society their basic needs will be taken care of by the state, then that takes a load of stress and a load of anxiety out of a lot of people's lives. And then just telling people they can have a cleaner, better environment. It is possible. Better is honestly possible. So I guess, it's about, we've got to try and get that message across that, a green economy, a green society is actually a really, really positive, good thing to aspire to.
Great. And just because you mentioned it, and we do have a question in the chat about it, would you support I've lost it now. Would you support a trial of universal basic income in Liverpool?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's Green Party policy to have a basic income. Ultimately, it should be a global thing. Every citizen on the planet should have a basic income that covers their needs and means they're not ever going to face destitution, whether they lose a job or anything like that. But yeah, I mean, locally, I would support a trial. It's something that I vote for in council before. It's a policy that we push. So I'm completely in favour of that, yeah.
What makes you think that you can do better on the climate than the Labour Party?
It's a fair question. It's a fair question. And the reason people might be asking it, because everybody belatedly has probably adopted the language of the climate emergency. And so it seems like to people who aren't as involved with the sort of day-to-day politics of it, it might seem as though, well, everyone's got the message now, the government have signed up to do it, so it's going to happen. But I think it's really important that we see that, declaring a climate emergency is very much the first step. And we really need to move from words to action now. And it's a year and a half since we declared a climate emergency in Liverpool. I just haven't seen enough action. And I think it comes down to the fact that the Green Party is, it's our sort of core founding principle that we need to have an economy which provides for everybody in a fair, equitable way within the limits of what the environment can bear. It's not extract resources at all costs to provide for people. It's provide for people in a way that is in harmony with, with what nature is able to provide. So that's our core principle. Whereas the other parties are very wedded to the concept of economic growth, and growth is, economic growth is seen as the way of being able to get hold of more, of the tax to be able to provide the services. And it's not good enough. It doesn't kind of free you to do the really bold, radical things. I don't think that philosophy, because you're always pursuing economic growth, which might be at odds with environmental protection. And I'll give you like an example. So obviously Labour have very much adopted the language of climate emergency, and they know that they need to have like a green item on the agenda of meetings. So at the last council meeting, they did have a green item, and it was having a review of the policy on council-owned advertising hoardings and the adverts on buses. Great. So that's a positive. It makes sense. We can make sure we don't have adverts for holidays on aeroplanes, for example. Make sure we don't encourage people to buy SUVs in Liverpool. So that makes sense. But in that same council agenda, there was a description of economic growth as a core principle of the council. There was a motion which called for Liverpool to be a retail centre, to continue to be a retail centre and encourage more tourism, which these are the types of economic activity that do come with quite a significant environmental impact. So there's still that really big inherent contradiction, I think, within the other parties, whereas the Green Party would, the starting point is it has to be sustainable and equitable at the same time.
Great. Thank you. I'll just ask one more question before we have a break, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I think sort of quite related, but a little bit different. What commitment can you make to stop location, film, television or music events in the city that continue to use, to stop location, film, television, music events in the city from continuing to use mobile diesel generators that poison our air and our children?
That is it's an interesting question. And I think as we move forward, we need to find new ways of powering things. That's fundamentally clear. Diesel is by far the biggest contributor to air pollution. So whatever we can do to get rid of diesel engines out of our city should really be done within reason. So, yeah, I think it's a question I've not been asked before, but I think there's a case now with the technology improving the way it does, with battery technology improving, with things like hydrogen fuel cells. Can we look at having alternative solutions to diesel? And an industry like the movie industry, for example, which has got a lot of money, we could be encouraging them to adopt new technologies as part of their corporate social responsibility. So really interesting question, and it's something I would definitely look at if elected as mayor.
Great. Thanks, Tom. Shall we have a break for 10 minutes? That sounds good. We'll come back at 2:55. Keep forgetting how to read a clock.